Welcome. My name is Neil Thrussell, and I'm super excited to have Sharon Sayler with me. When I first looked at her name, it was Sharon Slayer, and I'm like, oh no! So welcome, Sharon.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here myself. This is great. I always
So,
love talking to you.
Thank you. So Sharon is a speaker, an author, and what the part that really excites me is it says that she's an observer of life. And I'm like, are you not a participant as well?
Good question. I am a participant, but I love observing as well.
So, and to me that's cool because that means that without reading too much into it, means that you're a little bit of a, you've got a little bit of introspect going on here as you're watching and you're seeing life go on. I'm thinking, ooh, there's probably some really good success things going on.
Well, one of the things I say I'm an observer of life is I watch for patterns in my work with group dynamics and body language, nonverbal communication. It's always about context and patterns. And so you have to be quite observant to understand, okay, this is a pattern or is that a one-time thing?
Well, let's just jump into it. So if there is a pattern in success, and this is so broad and so open, so there's probably a million right answers. But what are some of the patterns that successful people do?
Oh, wow. Great question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is they listen carefully and they listen accurately. To me, that is critical with a lot of the professional CEO types that I work with, training them to listen and listen to the story behind the story is what's really critical.
Okay, that takes me out.
We don't have to listen that accurately all the time, but when it's a mission critical thing for your success, absolutely. I mean, no one can be on listening 100% of the time. Our mind wanders, I get that. But when it's a mission critical thing, listening for the story behind the story, listening very accurately, and then asking really good questions when you don't understand. Don't be afraid to not understand.
Sweet. So most of our interviews that we've done so far, we just jump right in and go deep.
Well, you and I love talking, Neil. We're just when we get together, this is how it is, guys.
Yeah. So, what is success to you? How would you define success?
Oh, I would have answered that totally different 3 years ago. Now, success is just being able to live life on my own terms. Before the autoimmune condition, I could have given you a whole long list of things, what it was, everything from, being known, having a brand that's known, all sorts of things. But now I say it's just living life on your own terms, being able to choose what you want to do, how you want to show up. To me, that's the critical thing, being able to have time for the things you want to do.
Thank you. So, I don't know, maybe you're different than me, but I suspect that there's a few times in life that you bumped up into things and life didn't go quite the way that didn't quite go the way that you wanted it to be. So, is there some learnings that life has offered you as you've moved forward and become successful in your own mind and in the minds of our viewers and listeners?
Wow. Yes. My goodness. We're going deep here today, Neil. This is great. I think every time I bump into something, shall we say, and usually my first thing that I found that I learned to control were my emotions around it. Just taking a moment, step back, doing some nice deep breaths, recognizing, ooh, that winged me, or ooh, that wasn't the best, smartest thing to do, whatever goes through your mind, and just step back and say, okay, I understand, and speak to myself. I know this is going to sound crazy, but speak to myself in third person, like, wow, yeah, Sharon, I can really understand that comment. Wow, that could really, that really set you back, or my goodness, that speech didn't go the way you wanted it to go. Wow, I can really understand that. Give myself some grace and some moment to recover. And because I think we can get too tied up in the emotion of it, and then the emotion carries us away. So if I deal with the emotion of it pretty quickly, I'm able then to come back and say, okay, we're back. Now what? What's next?
Sweet. So the 4Ds are desire, dedication, determination, and discipline. So this is a two-part question. Which one of the 4Ds do you find the easiest and you naturally fall into? And which one of the 4Ds is the most work? It's not your natural way of being.
That's a great question. A desire is the easiest. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I just see things and I just want to run with so much. I am naturally curious, and I can just hear someone talking and they'll say a great line, and I'll pull out my little notepads. I always walk around with 3x5 cards. That shows dating myself, but I can write it faster than I can type it in my phone, and I'll write it down. And there's some great line for my next blog post, or something that I want to speak about in a speech or something. So desire is probably the easiest to me just because of my natural curiosity. And the discipline part, I have to say, my assistants will tell you. Thank goodness for assistants, right?
Yeah.
But they're good on keeping me on track. I love doing it. I love giving the speeches. I love meeting people and things like that. It's the discipline, I'll say, of those little tidbits that always tend to get away with me, that having the discipline to carry it through completely to the end.
Because of the desire to see the next sparkly little bit.
Exactly. I'm on to the next thing long before the first thing is finished, unfortunately. But that's like I said, what we have assistants for. And I always say hire people that are different than you. Oftentimes the natural tendency, as you know, is to hire someone that you relate to and is very similar to you.
Yes.
Yeah, hire someone that has the tendencies and the patterns and the skills that you know you're lacking in, because they'll make then all of a sudden you make this great team because they love doing the part that you're like, oh, okay, I'll do it.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful point. As most successful people have put a team together to surround them for all working towards a common goal.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the great leader, the successful person, has to know what that goal is and be able to state it very succinctly. Now, it doesn't have to be the grand, huge goal. It doesn't have to be crystal clear. In my mind, I think people get this grand, huge goal crystal clear. And then, of course, as we were talking before, sometimes you end up taking a right or left turn or getting knocked off course. Sometimes no fault of your own, sometimes your own fault. And then they're not able to recover. So I like doing what I call the what next goals. So I have the great big grand vision of where we're going in my competitive edge communications, but it's flexible.
Yes.
But it's not so flexible that I follow every bright shiny object, if that makes sense. It's flexible, but we're taking just a step or two at the time to make sure that, gosh, do we still want that goal? I don't know if you've ever met anybody who all of a sudden they get to that goal. I was at a party one time, very successful, it was one of those success parties. Woohoo, we made it. And the person stood next to me and said, I thought I'd feel different. And I thought that was really sad. Oh my gosh, you worked so hard to get here. And
That's
gosh,
crazy.
you didn't check in with your motivations. Like, did you really want to go?
Interesting, very interesting. So, did you wake up one morning and just go, oh my gosh, this is what I want to do and what it is? Or was it a slow evolving process for you?
Oh, wow, great question. Can I say two-part? I started the traditional route, university, doing something, and I learned a lot of skills. And I owned a marketing and graphic design company for a while, and I was good at it. but I wasn't passionate about it, if that makes any sense. It's like
Absolutely, it does.
I had the skill, but I didn't have the passion. And then I had the opportunity after seeing a speech. I met my mentor, over 20 years ago now, my longtime mentor. And when I saw him and I saw what he was doing from stage, I was mesmerized. And that's when you know you're onto something, if you've ever been mesmerized.
Yes.
And I was just fascinated by what he did and happened to be able to strike up a conversation with him and ended up going to work for him after a few years. And we just developed this great mentor-mentee relationship that turned into equals. And now, even though I have my own company and he has his own company, we get together for breakfast sometimes and share like, what did you learn? What are you doing? And I just love that. But the moment that happened for me when I was working for him, he works a lot in education, and I loved it. But I had the opportunity to speak to 9 professional women one evening in what I call a salon. It was in a woman's living room. It was just a delight over tea, and
Yes.
we're just chatting. And I was talking about success and body language, nonverbal communication for women. And I'll tell you, it was that moment when you know you're home. I was talking to
Yes.
them, and
Yes.
I just
Yes.
sort of like, this is where I belong. And that's the difference to me. You can have a lot of skills, but when you have that moment of, this is where I belong, that to me is success. Because I just love what I do now. I mean, I'll keep doing it forever. It's not work.
Thank you. So what you said, which piqued my interest, mentor. I love it. So if I was, this is Neil, 19-year-old Neil. So I'm going to undo what I just said so that you can answer the question freely. But I'm the 19-year-old Neil, and I have this vision of what I want to do in life, and I'm juiced, jazzed, I'm ready to go. And we happened to meet, and I said, so what advice would you give me to move forward in my life?
Great. Wow. Several things come to mind. The first one is don't lose your passion. That's the critical thing. Sometimes people, even well-meaning people who you think will be a good mentor for you, will say, Sharon, get real, or share. How many of us heard those sorts of things? Or maybe Sharon, seriously. And don't lose your passion. If you really know in your heart, as I said, you're home, that's
Yes.
it for you. Keep going. There are always going to be people who, for a variety of reasons, sometimes they'll say things to you because they want to keep you safe. It's done from a very strange sort of love, but they want to keep you safe. Or other times they just don't see it. They don't get it. It's like, well, that's the silliest thing I've ever heard. How many things have you ever seen invented where you're like, wow, why didn't I think of that? And yet you might have heard like, wow, that's kind of silly. But who would have thought of the pet rock, really, But go for it. So don't lose your passion. If you know that is when you're home, is go for it. And then the other quick thing just is always, always nurture your network. People are the most important part of your success.
Yes. And for those that are not of the age group of myself that don't know what a pet rock is, it was actually someone was brilliant enough to take river rock and market it. So just a river rock. And they made millions of dollars because they were, I don't know, they were on something, but the marketing team and the genius, they got people to buy pet rocks.
Right, exactly. Thank you for bringing that up. I forget not everybody remembers the pet rock. But, I mean, how many times I can just see you going into a bank and saying, here's my little box that looks like a cage, and here's my little rock, and I'm going to sell this.
Yeah.
I imagine, I don't know for sure, but I imagine they heard no several times. Or the story Jack Canfield tells all the time about the chicken soup for the soul. I can't remember the number, but it was some astronomical number that he went to publishers and agents, and they all said, No. And yet, look, he was able to keep going and keep his confidence about he knew this was his passion. So I'd say keep going.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's one of the things I believe that successful people do is they're willing to take the hard knocks. They're willing to stumble. They're willing to be beaten down by good intentioned people, but they're still getting back up. And how many of us that are listening to this, watching this, the first time you failed at something, that's it. You're done. You don't want to do this ever again. And that's a crime. Follow your bliss. Follow your heart. Wherever, when you find that sensation of that you being home, you're home, and fight for your home.
Oh, absolutely. And I say failure is not the stumble. It's not getting up. That's the failure. Yeah, so the stumble has nothing to do with it. We all stumble. It's not getting up. And just a quick little story about I had mentioned the autoimmune condition. That was 3 years ago, and I was told, over the great big letters sort of on my head, lifelong, lifelong, this is your fate, and it was all downhill. And here it is 3 years later, off all meds, doing well, because I was like, no, that's not going to be my fate. That's not who I am. And sometimes we stumble, and it's nothing you've done. It could be, something from the outside, an unfortunate event, an unfortunate occurrence, but it's getting back up. I've had numerous people say to me, oh, Sharon, you're so brave. And I'm like, I understand where it's coming from, but it doesn't make sense to me, because to me there was no other option but to keep going, to,
Sweet.
to change it, to make sure that wasn't going to be my life. Sure, I wasn't happy to get a diagnosis, but that's not my life now. I'm off all meds and doing great. And it's like, okay.
And that's an interesting piece, because we can use Christmas or any kind of family event. You can have two siblings at the same table, the same going on, and one will react positively to an event at the family dinner, and one will respond negatively. So somewhere inside of us, we have this it's our innate desire to see things, and we need to refocus. If you were the half empty type of person, we need to learn to refocus our energies and learn to see the world differently. We don't, it's not a perfect and utopian world. You may never get away from those tendencies, but to get what you want, you actually have to fight for it.
True, but I found I can't remember where I saw it, but it was a cute quote the other day, and I apologize, I don't remember who to attribute it to, but it was cute because I liked it, of my idea of just going from what's next. And that was, if you're a half empty kind of person, get a smaller glass. And I was like,
Ooh, that's really good.
I kind of like that, because maybe your dream is a little vague because it's so big and so far out there. But if you just take it one step at a time, maybe the next 2 or 3 steps, you'll get there. It's pretty awesome. I didn't know at the time. I knew I wanted to heal. I didn't know how I was going to get there, and it was just by taking what next, what next, what next.
Sweet, thank you. Yeah, that's a beautiful little mantra. And even when you're highly successful, you're at the top of your game. What's next? One of the things that has come out of these interviews is every successful person has a set of goals, but they have a goal beyond that as well. So they're working towards whatever, bestseller status, to fill the room for whatever, or a physical goal. Like for myself, I just finished a marathon. And people are already asking me, what's next?
And your goals can be flexible too. Once you reach a certain place that you want to be, I wouldn't have thought 5 years ago that I'd be a children's author now, but that all of a sudden, with grandchildren in my world and being a nonfiction author, all of a sudden it just became like, yeah, that's my next goal. That's what I want to do, and become a children's author. So I want people to understand that even if you set certain goals, you can be flexible in them, or you can add more goals. It's not like, oh my gosh, I have to stay on this path. You can, you can be successful in multiple ways in multiple areas.
Absolutely. So that's good. How did one go from complete nonfiction to fiction to writing kids? I bet you there was a few bumps in that path.
Well, the first way it started was, it's a little serendipitous, I have to say. I woke up in the middle of the night with a story in my head. That's all I can say. And I
Yeah.
had to get up and start writing it down. Although I learned very quickly, and this is where it's important to nurture your network. I started calling people in my world that I knew had either written fiction, written children's books, things like that. I said, look, I want to hire you. I need help. I know this isn't my thing. Because the first story, it was a fun story, but it is very different now that it's out. It went from about 2,000 words to 700 words, and people were telling me, well, the one thing that I learned, and this is where having a great network, is someone read the story and they said, it's a really cute story, Sharon, but you can't be in two people's heads at one time unless you're some sort of omnipotent type of
Yeah.
being in the story. And so it was just wonderful things like that refined the story to where all of a sudden, 5 years later, guys, this wasn't overnight, even though the story happened quickly. The process was not overnight. 5 years later, out comes Pinky, Chenille, and the Rainbow Hunters. And there again, didn't know. I mean, I knew how to lay out a book, but I'd never hired an illustrator for a children's book before. So how do you do that? How do you work with an illustrator to get out of your head onto the paper? It's like asking the illustrator to read your mind, you know?
That would make it much easier. Here,
Yeah, that would have made it much
just
easier.
mind meld 1 second, and okay, now you know what I want.
Exactly.
So to me, what the sweet lesson, the secret sauce and all of that is you weren't afraid to ask questions, and
Yeah.
you sought out advice, because you could have just sat there and done it all yourself and put out a 2,000-word children's book, and it would have gone to your grandchild and no further.
Right.
And
Yes.
now, because you chose to do this, and it's not this number of sales, but it is in other children's hands. It is in other people. So your message got out. That's the win.
That's the win. Absolutely. It's been so well received. I'm absolutely thrilled by that. And you're right. Asking questions, having curiosity. And the fantastic thing I found is when you nurture your network, and by that I mean you give as much or more than you receive. There's this opportunity where people used to call them up and they say, oh, absolutely, I'm happy to tell you what I know. Or even like, oh, Sharon, that's fantastic. But I don't know anything about children's. I had a gal who writes fiction, and she said, but here's someone to call. Let me introduce you. And that's, to me, the success, is when you've got a cheerleading, you've got people in your world cheering for you. Then
Absolutely.
obviously there's an outside force that you're like, oh, I don't want to disappoint them either. So it keeps the momentum going.
I was recently running in the Victoria Marathon, and at kilometer 39, at kilometer 34, I got physically sick to my stomach. I couldn't eat anymore, and so I knew I was in trouble. And I was hoping I'd make it much further than kilometer 39 before my body starts to give me real grief. So at kilometer 39, I'm like, crap. And I have no bus money on me because I can't even take a bus to the end. So it's like, and then I saw a part of my support network. I had family and friends there, and they just waved to me. And it was like, I can do this. And I got out of my own pity, woe is me, woe is me. And it was just, my network helped carry me at some point in time.
They do all the time. I always say that. When you say some point in time, that's when it's the obvious, like you and the marathon, myself, and going, okay, I've got this children's book idea. What next? But I always say your network is always there. I just know at any point in time there are multiple people. If I needed something, I could, pick up the phone, text, email, whatever, and they'd be there. And I think that, and I'm there for them. They know that too. And I think that is true success when you have knowing that you have this great community, this great. Sometimes people call it. I like to call it my tribe. I love
Yes.
that.
I had a mentor, and he says, when you make my inner circle, and I'm gonna test you. And he says, if I'm in your city and I haven't seen you, I'm gonna phone you at some unearthly hour and say, let's meet for tea. And this mentor did on a Friday night. At like 2 a.m, he phones and says, Neil, I'm here. Come. And that would hang up. And I'm like, so there I'm sitting here at 2 a.m, groggily, and I'm like, okay, so now I have the choice. How I can take my old comfortable pattern and I really needed sleep, or I can get out of my own way and go and meet my mentor. And he was from another city in Canada. So I said, oh, fine, he's not here very often. So I went to see him. And well, this was on a Friday night. By Saturday night, we were still out and doing things. And I'm like, but the lessons, the incredible, powerful lessons that were taught and shared, he phoned 15 people. 5 people showed up.
Wow. I think 5 is a lot to show up, actually, when I'm thinking about that type of lesson. That's a very powerful mentor to get 5 out, get a third of the people to show up. That's pretty awesome. I have to say, though, I'm lucky. I guess my mentors have been a little more, like they sleep a little more or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Luckily, I haven't had that.
Well, and his whole lesson, like after all was said and done, was that we're so used to being comfortable that we allow the comforts to rule our training, our education. Like we had a great time, but when my head hit the pillow Saturday night, I don't think I saw anything till late Sunday because I just slept. But the profound lessons still I carry with me today. Like it's just, yeah, that's an entire another conference video series.
Right. Well, that's all about being out of our comfort zone and out of our box. I guess, we all can fall into our comfort zone, but I had a different mentor tell me one time, look, if you're not on the edge, you're taking up too much space, Sharon. And so it was a little blunt, but what he meant was keep pushing to the edge, get out of your box, keep going, don't get to the point where you're just taking up space. And I've always admired that. I work towards that because I have watched his life and how he's always trying new things, and he's very curious himself and willing to go, okay, let's try it. One thing I do for my birthday every year that people find a little strange, but I love it, and now people are sending me ideas, is every year for my birthday for I don't know how many years, as long as I can remember, I'll do something I've never done before. Whether I learned to shoot clay pigeons one time with shotguns, I went and learned to do that. I learned and didn't do so well, but I learned to ride a motorcycle. Let's see. Oh, gosh, so many things come to mind. Rock climbing was another one. There again, the people that I went with, scampered up the side of the mountain there, just like they were born to do it, and I not so much. But it wasn't the point that it was a not so much. It pushes you out of your comfort zone. It makes you comfortable with the uncomfortable. It makes you comfortable doing things you're like, oh, I could never do that. For heaven's sakes, one time I even learned to pole dance. Now that was fun too. You have to be really strong not to fly off that thing. So I took some girlfriends. 12 of us went to this gym that had this class, and we had a great time.
Cool. And that to me is one of the lifelines. Like one of the things I'm big on is we all have a purpose. We all need to be passionate about life. We need to be in our bliss with our purpose. And people go, well, I don't know what it is I want. Well, then get off the couch. It's simple to me. Get off the couch and go and find out. Try all these things. Try motorcycle, pole dancing, whatever it is. Go and try. And then eventually it will show up. It will, it will, it will.
You'll get that moment where you know you're home. And it's not just when I was at the salon with those women doing some talks about body language, nonverbal communication things. That was the moment when I knew I was home for my work. But there's all sorts of things that I've done in my life, hobbies and other things that I've done where I go, yeah, I'm home. And remember, I said rock climbing, not so much, motorcycles, not so much. That's okay. I mean, you just check them off your list. Okay, not so much.
Sweet, yes. So let's go back to sort of wrap this up. So do you have any rituals that you do to keep yourself centered, grounded, focused, and on task or on purpose, to keep you the success that Sharon wants in her life? What is it that you do to keep you focused?
I journal. I love a lot of gratitude, reminding myself of what I'm grateful for. And to be honest, sometimes it's not more than just being able to get up get up this morning. Sometimes that's it. That's okay. Just be grateful. I think, and telling people how much they matter. I love telling people how much they matter in my world. I think that's important. And the other thing I like to do is just make sure that I have time for myself to recharge. I'm one of those people that like to recharge by myself. I know people that like to recharge in groups, and it all works. But be sure that you're not so busy in your success that you don't take time to just reflect and have moments to go, am I on the right direction? Am I still going in the right direction?
Sweet. Thank you. So I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to be part of us on our journey. I know Jamie would be saying thank you, but he's in San Diego right now. So lucky him, as I'm still in Calgary and you're on the East Coast. So thank you for being part of the 4Ds of success.
Oh, it's my pleasure, guys. I love you both. So thank you for inviting me. I just knew I'd have fun, which I did. I always love talking to you guys.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.